The steam from Maya Rodriguez's coffee cup caught the morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Executive Tower's 42nd floor restaurant, creating ghostly spirals that seemed to dance with her mounting anxiety. She pressed her palm against the white ceramic, feeling its warmth seep through her skin as she watched three men in $1,000 suits lean over documents spread across table 12 like vultures examining carrion. Maya had been serving breakfast to Seattle's corporate elite for 7 years, her black non-slip shoes carrying her silently across polished marble floors, her practiced smile masking the sharp intelligence that had earned her a master's degree in forensic accounting, a degree that now felt like expensive wallpaper in her studio apartment. The recession had stolen her dreams of working for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, leaving her to navigate between tables with silver coffee pots and forced pleasantries, watching from the periphery as deals worth more than entire small towns were negotiated over Eggs Benedict. But this morning felt different. The usual hum of respectful conversation had been replaced by urgent whispers, and the man she recognized as Marcus Webb, CEO of Cascade Industries, looked pale despite his expensive tan. His fingers drummed against the mahogany table with the rapid percussion of barely controlled panic, while his two companions, a silver-haired lawyer named Patterson she'd seen before, and a younger man with predatory eyes who kept checking his Rolex, pushed document after document toward him with increasing insistence. "The Beijing partners are expecting confirmation by noon," the younger man was saying, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The wire transfer can't be delayed any longer, Marcus. $800 million doesn't just sit idle while you have second thoughts." Maya refilled their coffee cups with practiced invisibility, her movements automatic, while her mind cataloged details that seemed wrong. The documents bore official seals, but something about the typography nagged at her. The spacing between letters, the quality of the paper, the way certain signatures seemed to catch the light differently than others. Her forensic training whispered warnings she couldn't yet articulate, observations that felt significant but incomplete. Webb's hand shook slightly as he reached for his coffee, and Maya noticed the wedding ring he usually wore was absent. Divorce proceedings, perhaps, or something more complicated. The silver-haired Patterson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that Maya strained to hear while pretending to arrange sugar packets on the adjacent table. "The documentation is bulletproof, Marcus. My firm has handled acquisitions of this magnitude before. The Chinese consortium's due diligence team already approved everything. You're looking at the deal of the decade. Controlling interest in 3 rare earth mining operations, guaranteed government contracts for the next 20 years. This is generational wealth we're talking about." The younger man, his business card, glimpsed briefly when he'd paid for coffee earlier, identified him as Derek Hawthorne from Meridian Capital, spread additional pages across the table like a dealer revealing a winning hand. "The geological surveys confirm reserves worth over $3 billion. At $800 million, you're essentially buying dollar bills for 30 cents. The Chinese consortium chose you specifically because of Cascade Industries' reputation." Maya moved to clear plates from the neighboring table, her movements deliberate and slow to maintain her position within earshot. Something about Hawthorne's enthusiasm felt manufactured, too polished, like a rehearsed performance. She'd served enough genuine celebrations to recognize the difference between authentic excitement and carefully constructed theater. Webb pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound that made other diners glance over with mild irritation. "I need more time to review everything with my own legal team. $800 million isn't pocket change, even for Cascade." "Time is a luxury we don't have," Hawthorne replied, his smile never wavering, but his eyes hardening perceptibly. "The Chinese market moves fast. Hesitation signals weakness, and there are other American firms interested. Continental Resources has been circling this opportunity for months." Patterson nodded gravely, adjusting his wire-framed glasses with the theatrical precision of someone who'd perfected the gesture in countless boardrooms. Marcus, I understand the magnitude, but the regulatory window closes Friday. The new trade restrictions go into effect next week, which means this type of joint venture will be impossible for the foreseeable future. This isn't just an investment opportunity, it's the last investment opportunity. Maya retreated to the coffee station, her mind racing through the fragments of conversation she'd overheard. The urgency, the time pressure, the insistence on immediate action, all classic elements of sophisticated fraud. But these weren't street corner con artists. Patterson's law firm occupied 3 floors of this very building, and Derek Hawthorne's credentials seemed impeccable. Yet something fundamental felt wrong, like a symphony played slightly off-key. She pulled out her phone, typing a quick internet search for Meridian Capital Beijing Mining Consortium, while pretending to check the restaurant's reservation system. The results were surprisingly sparse. Press releases and corporate websites that looked legitimate but lacked the depth of detail she'd expect for a company handling billion-dollar transactions. Cross-referencing the geological survey company mentioned in the documents revealed a business address that led to a virtual office space in Delaware. The morning rush was beginning to thin, but the tension at table 12 had only intensified. Webb was now on his phone, speaking in rapid, quiet tones to someone Maya assumed was his own financial advisor. Hawthorne and Patterson exchanged meaningful glances, their earlier congeniality replaced by barely concealed impatience. "Maya," called Susan, the restaurant manager, from across the dining room, "could you handle the Jameson party reservation for this afternoon? They're flying in from Portland specifically for our signature seafood platter." Maya nodded, forcing herself to focus on immediate responsibilities while her mind continued processing the troubling elements of the conversation she'd witnessed. The Jameson reservation was routine, a family celebration, probably a business promotion or anniversary. Normal people conducting normal business, unlike the high-stakes theater unfolding at table 12. She updated the reservation system. Her fingers moved automatically, while her thoughts returned to the documents she'd glimpsed. The seals looked authentic, but her forensic accounting program had taught her that modern counterfeiting technology could replicate almost anything. What couldn't be easily replicated was the subtle evidence of legitimate bureaucratic processes, the accumulated imperfections, the layered history of genuine government documentation. Webb ended his phone call and returned to the table, his expression even more troubled than before. "My CFO has concerns about the timeline. $800 million represents nearly 30% of our liquid assets. Standard due diligence for an acquisition of this size typically takes months, not days." Hawthorne's response came swift and sharp, like a blade designed to cut through doubt. "Standard timelines are for standard opportunities. This is insider access, Marcus, the kind of deal that creates dynasties. The Beijing partners specifically requested American involvement, but they won't wait indefinitely for someone who can't recognize fortune when it's offered." Maya watched Webb's shoulders sag slightly, the weight of decision pressing down on him like a physical force. She'd seen this before in her forensic accounting training, the moment when rational skepticism began yielding to manufactured urgency. The pressure to act, the fear of missing out, the carefully constructed narrative of exclusive opportunity, all designed to override the natural caution that protected people from catastrophic mistakes. Patterson pulled out a gold fountain pen with ceremonial gravitas, placing it beside the signature pages with theatrical precision. "The transfer authorization just needs your signature, Marcus. My firm will handle all the regulatory filings. The Chinese partners have already deposited their matching funds into the escrow account." The escrow account, another red flag that made Maya pulse quicken. Legitimate international business deals of this magnitude typically involved multiple layers of verification, not simple escrow arrangements that could vanish with a few keystrokes. She glanced at the documents again, noting serial numbers and reference codes that she could potentially verify if given the opportunity. The restaurant's atmosphere had grown quieter as the morning crowd dispersed, leaving only a handful of tables occupied. Maya realized she was running out of legitimate reasons to linger near table 12, but something deep in her gut insisted she couldn't simply walk away. $800 million, enough to fund hospitals, schools, entire communities. If these documents were fraudulent, Webb was about to destroy not just his own company, but the livelihoods of thousands of employees. She approached their table once more, coffee pot in hand, her heart hammering against her ribs with the intensity of her internal conflict. Webb looked up at her with tired eyes, and for a moment she saw past the corporate facade to the human being beneath. Someone's father, probably. Someone's husband, a man who'd built something meaningful and was now being asked to risk everything on the word of strangers. "More coffee, gentlemen?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty raging in her mind. Webb nodded gratefully, but as Maya leaned forward to refill his cup, she caught a sight of a document that made her blood run cold. It was a geological survey report, and the formatting was identical to several fraudulent documents she'd studied in her forensic accounting program 3 years earlier. The realization hit her like ice water. She was witnessing the setup for one of the largest corporate fraud schemes in the Pacific Northwest history, and she might be the only person in a position to stop it. Maya Rodriguez had spent 7 years serving Seattle's corporate elite while her master's degree in forensic accounting collected dust. The recession had killed her FBI dreams, leaving her invisible again, just like growing up as the daughter of migrant farm workers in Yakima Valley. But Webb's haunted expression at table 12 had awakened something in Maya that had been dormant too long. The same instinct that had driven her to forensic accounting in the first place, a bone-deep conviction that numbers told stories, that patterns revealed truth, and that someone needed to stand between predators and their victims. She'd chosen forensic accounting because she believed in justice, not just as an abstract concept, but as a practical necessity for society to function. During her break, Maya researched Meridian Capital on her laptop. Virtual offices, fake addresses, and worst of all, document serial numbers identical to the unsolved Cromwell mining fraud from 2019. Same criminals, same methods, about to steal $800 million. She pulled up her contacts list, scrolling past friends and family to reach a name she hadn't called in 3 years. Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. They'd met at a forensic accounting conference when Maya was still optimistic about federal employment, and Chen had encouraged her to apply despite the hiring freeze. The business card Chen had given her was now worn soft from handling, but the phone number was still programmed into Maya's contacts with the notation, "Emergency only." This qualified as an emergency. Maya stared at Chen's number, her finger hovering over the call button. Her heart pounded. What if she was wrong? She'd be calling the FBI to report what exactly? Suspicious documents she'd glimpsed while serving coffee? They'd laugh her off the phone. But then she pictured Webb's haunted expression. $800 million, thousands of jobs. The same criminals who'd escaped justice 3 years ago. Her hand shook as she dialed. The employee lounge door opened, and Susan entered with a concerned expression that made Maya's stomach clench with guilt. "Maya, you've been on break for 20 minutes. We've got the Johnson corporate lunch coming in at noon, and I need you to help set up the private dining room." "Of course. I'm sorry," Maya replied, closing her laptop with reluctance that felt like betrayal. The Johnson lunch was important. 60 guests from a pharmaceutical company celebrating a successful FDA approval. The kind of legitimate business celebration that kept the restaurant profitable and Maya employed. As she returned to work, Maya tried to push thoughts of Webb and the fraudulent documents from her mind, but they clung to her consciousness like smoke. She went through the motions of setting tables and reviewing the afternoon's reservations, while her internal voice grew louder and more insistent. $800 million, thousands of jobs, the same criminals who'd escaped justice 3 years ago. The lunch rush brought its usual controlled chaos. pharmaceutical executives toasting their success, tech entrepreneurs discussing startup funding, lawyers billing hours while they ate. Maya moved between tables with automatic efficiency, her body present while her mind remained trapped at table 12. During quiet moments, she found herself studying the faces of diners, wondering how many of them had ever faced a moment of moral clarity this stark, this unforgiving. At 2:15 p.m., she saw Webb through the restaurant's windows, standing outside the building and talking intently on his phone. Even from a distance, his body language conveyed the weight of impending decision. Maya watched him pace back and forth on the sidewalk, one hand gesturing emphatically, while the other pressed the phone against his ear. Whatever conversation he was having, it appeared to be reaching its conclusion. Maya's break couldn't come soon enough. She found herself checking her phone compulsively, Chen's number glowing on the screen like a beacon, or a warning, depending on perspective. The smart move was to mind her own business, focus on keeping the job that paid her rent, and accept that some problems were too big for someone in her position to solve. But Maya had never been particularly smart about choosing the safe path. At 3:30 p.m., she stepped into the restaurant's small office space, closed the door, and dialed Chen's number with fingers that trembled slightly from adrenaline and caffeine. The phone rang 4 times before connecting to voicemail, Chen's professional voice requesting a message and promising a callback within 24 hours. Maya hung up without speaking, her nerve failing at the crucial moment. What would she say? That she overheard a conversation that might indicate fraud? That her intuition suggested documents were forged? That a waitress with a master's degree thought she'd identified a major federal crime in progress? The story sounded ridiculous even in her own head. But as the afternoon wore on, and Maya continued serving coffee and clearing plates, the weight of potential inaction grew heavier than the risk of being wrong. She thought about her parents, who taught her that dignity came from standing up for what was right, regardless of personal cost. She thought about the forensic accounting professors who'd praised her analytical skills and encouraged her to trust her instincts. Most importantly, she thought about the thousands of Cascade Industries employees who'd lose their jobs if Webb fell victim to this sophisticated scam. At 4:45 p.m., Maya tried calling Chen again. This time, the agent answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional, but with an undertone of curiosity that suggested she remembered their previous interaction. "Agent Chen, this is Maya Rodriguez. I met you at the Pacific Northwest Forensic Accounting Conference 3 years ago. I have information about what I believe to be a major fraud in progress, possibly connected to the Cromwell mining case." There was a brief pause before Chen responded, her tone shifting to focused attention. "Miss Rodriguez, I remember you. You applied for a position with our financial crimes unit. Where are you calling from and what exactly have you observed?"
Maya took a deep breath and began explaining everything she'd witnessed, from the suspicious documents to the pressure tactics being used against Webb. As she spoke, she could hear Chen typing notes, occasionally asking for clarification or specific details about the document's formatting and content. When Maya finished her account, Chen was quiet for several seconds before responding with questions that demonstrated both professional skepticism and genuine interest in the information Maya had provided. "Ms. Rodriguez, what you've described does share significant characteristics with the Cromwell case, particularly the document formatting irregularities and the pressure tactics. However, I need to be clear about something. Investigating a potentially ongoing fraud requires immediate action, which could put you at considerable personal risk. Are you prepared for that possibility?" Maya looked through the office window at the dining room, where she'd spent 7 years serving people who treated her as part of the furniture, invisible and interchangeable. The safe choice would be to provide Chen with the information and step back, letting federal agents handle whatever came next. But safety had never been Maya's primary consideration, and the memory of Webb's haunted expression made retreat impossible. "Agent Chen, I'm prepared to do whatever's necessary to prevent this fraud from succeeding. Agent Sarah Chen arrived at Executive Tower within 45 minutes of Maya's call, her presence transforming the elegant restaurant into something resembling a crime scene. Maya watched from behind the coffee station as Chen, accompanied by a younger agent introduced as Martinez, conducted what appeared to be a casual conversation with Patterson near the elevator bank. To observers, it might have looked like a chance encounter between old acquaintances, but Maya recognized the subtle interrogation techniques she'd studied in her forensic training. The afternoon's remaining diners seemed oblivious to the federal investigation unfolding around them, continuing their conversations about quarterly earnings and market projections while Maya served coffee with hands that trembled slightly from adrenaline. She'd crossed a line by calling the FBI, transforming herself from passive observer to active participant in whatever was about to unfold. Webb had returned to the restaurant at 4 p.m., rejoining Hawthorne and Patterson at their now familiar table. But something had changed in his demeanor. The earlier uncertainty had been replaced by grim determination, suggesting he'd made his decision during the phone call Maya had witnessed. The documents were spread across the table again, but this time Webb was reviewing them with the methodical attention of someone preparing to sign. "The transfer needs to happen before market close in Hong Kong," Hawthorne was saying, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet dining room. "The Beijing partners have already moved their matching funds into position. Any delay signals that American business partners can't be trusted to honor their commitments." Maya moved closer to their table, refilling water glasses with exaggerated care while straining to hear every word. Chen and Martinez had positioned themselves at a corner table where they could observe the interaction while maintaining their cover as casual diners. The setup felt surreal, a federal investigation disguised as an afternoon coffee break. Patterson produced a tablet computer, its screen displaying what appeared to be a secure banking interface. "The wire transfer authorization is already prepared, Marcus. Your signature on the final documents triggers the release of funds automatically. $800 million transferred to the consortium's escrow account in the Cayman Islands with full ownership of the mining operations transferred to Cascade Industries." The Cayman Islands, another red flag that made Maya's forensic training scream warnings. Legitimate international business deals rarely required funds to flow through offshore tax havens, particularly for transactions involving natural resources with clear geographic locations. But Webb seemed focused only on the potential profits, his earlier caution apparently overcome by whatever assurances he'd received during his private phone calls. Maya caught Chen's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly toward the tablet Patterson was using. The agent's expression remained neutral, but she subtly photographed the screen using her phone's camera while pretending to check messages. The coordination felt natural, as if Maya and Chen had worked together for years rather than conducting their first joint operation. "I've spoken with my board of directors," Webb announced, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "Cascade Industries is prepared to move forward with the full $800 million investment. The geological surveys are compelling, and the exclusive access to Chinese markets represents exactly the kind of expansion opportunity we've been seeking." Hawthorne's smile was triumphant but controlled, like a poker player who just filled an inside straight but didn't want to celebrate too early. "Outstanding decision, Marcus. This partnership will establish Cascade as the dominant player in rare earth extraction for decades to come. The Beijing partners will be delighted to welcome such a visionary American company into the consortium." Webb reached for his pen to sign the final document. Maya watched in horror, frozen behind the coffee station. This was it. In 30 seconds, $800 million would be gone forever. She thought of her parents, who taught her that courage meant standing up when it mattered most. Maya stepped forward. But doubt continued to gnaw at the edges of her certainty. What if she was wrong?
What if her frustration with her own career had made her paranoid, seeing conspiracy where none existed? Patterson's law firm was legitimate, his reputation solid enough to handle major corporate transactions. Hawthorne presented well, his knowledge of international business seemingly comprehensive. And Webb himself was no amateur. He'd built Cascade Industries from a small regional company into a major player in the Pacific Northwest's industrial sector. The internal debate was interrupted when Maya noticed Chen discreetly signaling for her to approach their table. Moving with practiced restaurant efficiency, Maya walked over with a coffee pot, her heart hammering against her ribs as she prepared to play her role in whatever Chen had planned. "Excuse me," Chen said in a voice pitched perfectly for nearby tables to overhear. "Weren't you at the International Fraud Prevention Conference in Vancouver last month? I could swear I recognize you from the presentation on document authentication." Maya felt a moment of panic before realizing Chen was providing her with a cover story that would explain her expertise without revealing their prior relationship. "Yes, that was an excellent presentation. The speaker discussed several techniques for identifying forged government documents, particularly the subtle formatting errors that modern counterfeiters often miss." The conversation was deliberately loud enough for Patterson and Hawthorne to hear, and Maya noticed both men glance over with expressions of mild curiosity. Chen continued the manufactured dialogue, discussing document authentication techniques in terms technical enough to demonstrate expertise, but general enough to avoid seeming like a direct threat. The most sophisticated forgeries often replicate obvious elements like seals and signatures, but they frequently miss subtle details like kerning errors in official fonts or the specific paper stock used by government agencies. I remember one case where an entire fraud scheme was exposed because the perpetrators used the wrong grade of security paper. Maya watched Hawthorne's face carefully, noting a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested Chen's words had hit their mark. Patterson, meanwhile, seemed focused on hurrying Webb through the remaining signature pages, his earlier leisurely pace replaced by obvious urgency. The afternoon was stretching toward evening, and Maya realized her shift would be ending soon. But leaving now felt like abandoning her post at the most critical moment, like a soldier walking away from battle just as the decisive engagement began. She approached Susan with a request that surprised even her. "I'd like to work a double shift today, if possible. I know the evening server called in sick yesterday, and you mentioned needing coverage." Susan looked surprised, but pleased. "That would be wonderful, Maya. The evening crowd is always lighter, but we've got the Hartwell Industries reception at 7, and I was worried about being short-staffed." The Hartwell reception would provide perfect cover for extended observation of Webb's table, which showed no signs of breaking up despite the late hour. If anything, the urgency surrounding the document signing had only intensified, with Patterson now making phone calls to what he claimed were banking officials in Hong Kong and the Cayman Islands. As Maya prepared for the evening shift, changing into a fresh uniform and reviewing the reception menu, she found herself thinking about her parents' stories of union organizing in the agricultural fields of central Washington. Eduardo Rodriguez had often told her about the courage required to speak truth to power, about the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and about the personal cost of standing up for what was right. Tonight, Maya thought, she would finally understand what her father had been trying to teach her. The Hartwell reception began at 7 p.m., with 60 guests celebrating a successful product launch. Maya moved between the reception crowd and Webb's table, serving appetizers and drinks while maintaining her surveillance of the ongoing fraud scheme. The contrast was stark. Legitimate business celebration at one end of the restaurant, elaborate criminal conspiracy at the other. Chen and Martinez had maintained their cover throughout the evening, occasionally making quiet phone calls that Maya assumed were coordinating with other federal agents. The investigation was clearly expanding beyond simple observation, but Maya remained in the dark about what actions were being planned or when they might occur. At 8:30 p.m., Hawthorne announced that the Hong Kong markets would be opening soon, making immediate action essential. The wire transfer authorization expires at midnight Hong Kong time. After that, the Beijing partners will assume American commitment has wavered and the opportunity will be offered to Continental Resources. Webb nodded grimly, his exhaustion evident after hours of document review and signature. Everything appears to be in order. The geological surveys are comprehensive. The legal documentation is thorough. And my CFO has confirmed that Cascade has sufficient liquidity for the transaction.
Maya watched in horror as Webb initiated what appeared to be the final wire transfer authorization, his fingers moving across the tablet's touchscreen interface with the mechanical precision of someone following detailed instructions. $800 million, nearly the entire liquid assets of Cascade Industries, was about to disappear into an offshore account controlled by sophisticated criminals. But as Webb's finger hovered over the final confirmation button, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She walked directly to their cable, abandoned all pretense of professional invisibility, and spoke with a clarity and authority that surprised even her. Mr. Webb, that document in your left hand contains a serial number that was used in the Cromwell mining fraud case of 2019. The Geological Survey report uses formatting identical to forged documents that defrauded investors of $400 million. And the kerning error in the federal seal is a known signature of professional document counterfeiters. The silence that followed was absolute, as if Maya's words had created a vacuum that absorbed all sound in the restaurant. Webb stared at her with an expression of complete bewilderment, while Hawthorne and Patterson exchanged glances that confirmed everything Maya had suspected about their true intentions. Chen stood up from her corner table, her FBI credentials visible as she approached. "Mr. Webb, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I'd like to ask you to step away from that tablet and avoid completing any financial transactions until we've had an opportunity to verify the authenticity of these documents." What happened next exceeded Maya's worst expectations. Instead of cooperating or attempting to flee, Hawthorne reached into his jacket with a motion that made Chen immediately draw her weapon, shouting commands for everyone to get down while Martinez called for backup. The elegant restaurant erupted into chaos as Hartwell reception guests screamed and dove for cover behind overturned tables, while Webb stood frozen with the tablet still in his hands, $800 million hanging in the balance between confirmation and cancellation. The chaos lasted only seconds, but those seconds stretched like hours in Maya's perception. Hawthorne's hand had moved toward his jacket not for a weapon, but for his phone, presumably to warn accomplices that their operation had been compromised. Chen's training kicked in instantly, her service weapon drawn and trained on Hawthorne, while she barked commands that cut through the restaurant's panicked atmosphere like a blade through silk. "Nobody moves. FBI, keep your hands visible." Martinez was already on his radio, calling for immediate backup and a cybercrime specialist to analyze the wire transfer interface that Webb still held in his trembling hands. The Hartwell Industries reception guests huddled behind overturned tables, their celebration transformed into a surreal crime scene that would become Seattle business community legend. Maya found herself crouched behind the coffee station, her heart hammering as she watched the confrontation unfold. Everything she suspected about the fraudulent documents was being validated in real time, but the confirmation brought no satisfaction, only the crushing weight of responsibility for having triggered a federal investigation that could have ended tragically. Patterson, his earlier confidence completely evaporated, was cooperating fully with Agent Martinez's questions, while Hawthorne remained sullenly silent under Chen's watchful guard. The silver-haired lawyer's hands shook as he produced business cards, phone records, and what appeared to be legitimate legal credentials, his professional reputation disintegrating with each passing minute. "I had no idea," Patterson was saying, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine distress. "Meridian Capital approached my firm 3 months ago with what appeared to be completely legitimate documentation. The geological surveys, the Chinese consortium paperwork, the regulatory approvals, everything looked authentic."
Webb had collapsed into his chair, the tablet containing the wire transfer authorization sitting untouched on the table like a loaded weapon. His face had gone ashen as the implications became clear. Not just the $800 million he'd nearly lost, but the realization that his company's survival had depended on the intervention of a waitress whose name he didn't even know. Chen holstered her weapon as additional agents began arriving, transforming the Executive Tower restaurant into a coordinated crime scene. Maya watched from her position behind the coffee station as federal investigators photographed documents, bagged evidence, and began the careful process of unraveling what appeared to be a sophisticated international fraud scheme. "Ms. Rodriguez," Chen called, waving her over to the now secure table where Webb sat in stunned silence. "I'd like you to walk us through exactly what you observed that made you suspicious of these documents." Maya approached on unsteady legs, acutely aware that 60 reception guests and a dozen federal agents were watching her every move. The invisibility that had defined her 7 years in this restaurant was gone forever, replaced with a spotlight she'd never sought but could no longer avoid. The kerning error in the federal seal was identical to documents used in the Cromwell mining case, Maya began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. The geological survey formatting matched known forgeries from that investigation, and the serial numbers on the regulatory approvals were sequential in a way that suggests batch production rather than authentic government processing.
Webb looked up at her with an expression Maya couldn't interpret, gratitude mixed with bewilderment, and something that might have been shame. "You're a waitress?" he said quietly, not as an insult, but as a statement of confusion. "How do you know about document forensics?" "I have a master's degree in forensic accounting," Maya replied, feeling years of suppressed pride and frustration surface in her voice. "I've been trying to get into federal law enforcement for 3 years, but hiring freezes and budget cuts made positions unavailable. So I've been serving coffee to people like you while watching crimes happen that I was trained to prevent." The response seemed to hit Webb harder than the revelation about the fraudulent documents. He stared at Maya as if seeing her for the first time, which in many ways was exactly what was happening. The invisible service worker had become a person with expertise, history, and agency. Someone whose intervention had just saved his company from catastrophic fraud. Agent Chen was reviewing the documents with a cybercrime specialist who'd arrived to analyze the tablet interface. Maya listened as they discussed the sophisticated nature of the scheme, the coordination required to produce such convincing forgeries, and the international scope of what appeared to be a criminal organization that had been operating for years. "The tablet interface is particularly clever," the cybercrime specialist was explaining. "It mimics legitimate banking software perfectly, but it's actually designed to capture login credentials and routing information. If Mr. Webb had completed the transaction, the criminals would have gained access not just to the $800 million, but to Cascade Industries' entire banking infrastructure." The implications were staggering. Maya realized she'd prevented not just a fraud, but a complete corporate takeover, disguised as an investment opportunity. The criminals hadn't just wanted Webb's money, they'd wanted his company, his customer base, his government contracts, everything he'd built over decades of work. Patterson was providing investigators with extensive records of his interactions with Meridian Capital, his cooperation complete and seemingly genuine. Maya found herself feeling sorry for the silver-haired lawyer, whose reputation would inevitably suffer despite his apparent innocence. The criminals had chosen their marks carefully, selecting legitimate professionals whose credibility would lend authenticity to their scheme. But Hawthorne remained defiant even in custody. His silence suggested either loyalty to criminal associates or confidence that his legal position was stronger than it appeared. Maya watched as Agent Martinez attempted various interrogation approaches, each met with the same blank stare and refusal to cooperate. As the evening stretched toward night,
Maya found herself giving her statement to Agent Chen while crime scene technicians photographed evidence and interviewed witnesses. The Hartwell Industries reception guests had been allowed to leave after providing contact information, but many lingered in the lobby, fascinated by the dramatic conclusion to what should have been a routine business celebration. "Ms. Rodriguez," Chen said during a break in Maya's statement, "your analysis was remarkably accurate. The document formatting irregularities you identified are consistent with a criminal organization we've been tracking across multiple jurisdictions. This may be the break we've been waiting for in several related cases." Maya felt a complex mixture of vindication and exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by the weight of what she'd set in motion. "What happens now?" she asked, looking around the restaurant that would never feel the same to her again. "Now, we follow the evidence wherever it leads. The tablet interface is already providing valuable intelligence about the criminal's technical infrastructure. Patterson's cooperation is helping us understand how they identify and approach potential victims. And your observations about the document forgeries may help us connect this case to others we've been investigating." Webb approached their table with hesitant steps, his earlier corporate confidence replaced by something resembling humility. "Miss Rodriguez, I owe you an apology and a debt I'm not sure I can repay. You saved my company, but more importantly, you saved thousands of jobs. People I employ, their families, entire communities that depend on Cascade Industries." Maya looked up at him, this man she'd served coffee to for months, without ever exchanging more than pleasantries about weather and restaurant specials. "I did what anyone with my training would have done," she said quietly. "The real tragedy is how close you came to disaster because the system failed to put people like me in positions where we could prevent crimes instead of just witnessing them." The response hit its mark. Webb's expression shifted from gratitude to something approaching understanding. "What can I do to change that?" he asked, and Maya heard in his voice the same determination that had built Cascade Industries from a regional player into a major corporation. Before Maya could respond, Agent Martinez approached with news that would reshape the entire investigation. "We've got confirmation from Interpol. Hawthorne isn't Derek Hawthorne at all. He's Marcus Volkov, wanted in connection with frauds totaling over $2 billion across 4 countries. And the Meridian Capital operation appears to be much larger than we initially believed." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled investigators. Maya realized she'd helped expose not just one fraud attempt, but a major international criminal organization that had been operating with impunity for years. Chen was immediately on her phone, coordinating with federal task forces in multiple cities where similar schemes might be unfolding. Maya listened as fragments of conversation revealed the true scale of the investigation. Dozens of potential victims, hundreds of millions in attempted frauds, a network of criminals sophisticated enough to fool experienced business leaders and legal professionals. "Miss Rodriguez," Webb said, drawing her attention back to their conversation, "I meant what I said about changing how the system works. Cascade Industries has security consulting contracts with several federal agencies. We provide logistical support for complex investigations, and we're always looking for people with specialized expertise." Maya stared at him, unsure whether to believe what she was hearing. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a career," Webb replied. "Head of Corporate Security, specializing in fraud prevention and financial crime investigation. You'd work directly with federal agencies on cases like this one, but with the resources and authority to prevent crimes before they happen, instead of just investigating afterward." The offer was everything Maya had dreamed of during 7 years of serving coffee and watching from the sidelines. But the timing felt surreal, a career-defining opportunity emerging from what had begun as an ordinary Tuesday morning shift. She looked around the restaurant that had been her workplace and prison, trying to process the magnitude of change that a single moment of moral courage had triggered. There would be conditions, Webb continued. You'd need to complete federal law enforcement training, obtain security clearances, and probably testify in multiple prosecutions. This isn't just a job offer, it's an invitation to become a professional witness in some of the most complex financial crimes cases in the country. Maya thought about her parents, who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had. She thought about her professors, who had recognized her potential and encouraged her to pursue federal law enforcement despite the obstacles. Most importantly, she thought about the thousands of Cascade Industries employees who would still have jobs tomorrow because she'd found the courage to speak up when it mattered most. "I accept," Maya said, the verbs carrying the weight of finality and the promise of transformation. But as Maya shook Webb's hand, formalizing an agreement that would reshape her entire future, Agent Chen was receiving information that would make her new position even more crucial than anyone realized. "We've got a problem," Chen announced to the assembled investigators. "Intelligence indicates this fraud attempt was just a test run. The real target appears to be a consortium of Pacific Northwest technology companies, including several with significant government contracts. The potential loss isn't $800 million, it's closer to $8 billion. The revelation transformed the entire investigation from a prevented fraud into the opening move of what appeared to be an economic attack designed to destabilize the region's entire technology sector. Maya realized she wasn't just changing careers, she was entering a war between sophisticated criminals and the legitimate business community they were systematically targeting. Webb's expression hardened with the grim determination Maya had seen earlier when he'd been deciding whether to sign the fraudulent documents. "Miss Rodriguez, your first assignment as head of corporate security will be helping us protect every major technology company in the Pacific Northwest from the same criminals who almost destroyed Cascade Industries." Maya looked around the restaurant one final time, memorizing the space where she'd spent 7 years preparing for a moment she hadn't known was coming. The coffee station where she'd made thousands of cups for people who barely acknowledged her existence, the tables where she'd overheard conversations that revealed the casual corruption of the business world, the windows overlooking Elliott Bay where she dreamed of a career that seemed perpetually out of reach. Tomorrow, she would walk into Cascade Industries headquarters as an executive with the authority and resources to prevent financial crimes on a massive scale. But tonight, she was still Maya Rodriguez, the invisible waitress whose sharp eyes and forensic training had just prevented one of the largest corporate frauds in the Pacific Northwest history. The irony wasn't lost on her that visibility, the thing she'd craved for 7 years, had come not through recognition of her credentials or expertise, but through a single moment of courage when speaking up was the right thing to do regardless of personal consequences. As federal agents continued processing evidence and coordinating with law enforcement agencies across multiple countries, Maya began to understand that her intervention at Table 12 had triggered something much larger than anyone initially realized. She'd opened a door that revealed not just a single criminal conspiracy, but an entire shadow economy built on sophisticated fraud and financial manipulation. The invisible waitress had become visible, not by seeking attention, but by accepting responsibility. And in doing so, she discovered that true recognition came not from being seen, but from seeing clearly and having the courage to act on what she observed. If Maya's incredible story inspired you, please like this video, subscribe for more amazing true stories, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that one person really can make a difference. Your support keeps these stories coming. 6 months later, Maya Rodriguez stood in the conference room of Cascade Industries headquarters, addressing a joint task force of FBI agents, corporate security directors, and technology executives from across the Pacific Northwest. The room's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, but Maya's attention was focused on the evidence boards that lined the walls. Photographs, financial documents, and network diagrams mapping the criminal organization that had targeted Webb and dozens of other business leaders. The transformation had been dizzying. Maya's new office occupied the same floor where she'd once served coffee to executives who now sought her expertise on financial crime prevention. Her business cards identified her as Director of Corporate Security and Financial Crime Prevention, but the title barely captured the scope of her responsibilities
or the respect she'd earned within the federal law enforcement community. The Volkov investigation had expanded far beyond the initial fraud attempt against Cascade Industries. Working with Agent Chen's Financial Crimes Task Force, Maya had helped identify a network of criminals operating across 4 continents using sophisticated document forgeries and social engineering to target wealthy individuals and corporations. The scope was staggering. Over 50 successful frauds totaling nearly $3 billion, with potential victims including technology companies, defense contractors, and even municipal governments. The pattern recognition software we've developed has identified 12 active fraud schemes currently targeting Pacific Northwest businesses, Maya announced to the assembled task force. Each one follows the same basic structure we saw with the Cascade attempt: manufactured urgency, sophisticated document forgeries, and carefully researched social engineering designed to bypass normal due diligence procedures. Webb, now a close colleague rather than a distant CEO, nodded approvingly from his position at the conference table. The near disaster had transformed him from a typical corporate executive into a passionate advocate for financial crime prevention. Cascade Industries had become a model for how legitimate businesses could cooperate with law enforcement to protect themselves and their competitors from sophisticated criminal organizations. But Maya's success had come with personal costs she hadn't anticipated. The federal training had been grueling. Weapons certification, cybercrime investigation techniques, advanced forensic accounting methods, and testimony preparation that prepared her for cross-examination by defense attorneys representing sophisticated criminals. The security clearance process required extensive background investigations that probed every aspect of her life and history. More challenging had been the psychological adjustment to her new visibility. Maya had spent 7 years learning to be invisible, and suddenly she was testifying before congressional committees, consulting with international law enforcement agencies, and speaking at conferences attended by the same corporate elite she'd once served in silence. The transition from observer to participant had required rebuilding her entire professional identity. The personal relationships had been the most difficult adjustment. Her parents, Eduardo and Carmen Rodriguez, were proud but bewildered by their daughter's transformation from waitress to federal consultant. Maya's apartment in Capitol Hill had been replaced by a condominium in Belltown, complete with security systems and communications equipment that connected her directly to FBI operations centers. The student loan payments that had dominated her budget for years were now easily manageable, but the financial security felt surreal after so many years of careful budgeting and deferred dreams. Dating had become virtually impossible. Maya's security clearance and public profile made casual relationships complicated, while her dedication to the fraud prevention work left little time for developing serious partnerships. She'd gained professional respect, but lost the anonymity that had allowed her to observe human behavior without affecting it. Agent Chen had become both colleague and mentor, helping Maya navigate the complex politics of federal law enforcement while maintaining her focus on preventing crimes rather than just investigating them after the fact. The Meridian Capital Network has been operating for at least 5 years, Chen was explaining to the task force. They target victims systematically using detailed research to identify individuals with significant liquid assets and psychological profiles that suggest susceptibility to their particular pressure tactics. Marcus Webb wasn't chosen randomly. He was selected specifically because his company's financial position and his personal decision-making patterns made him an ideal target. Maya had learned to compartmentalize the disturbing implications of what they'd discovered. The criminals weren't opportunistic predators operating random schemes. They were sophisticated analysts who studied potential victims with the same methodical attention that legitimate businesses use to identify customers. The fraud attempts were carefully choreographed performances designed to exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities while bypassing rational skepticism.
The investigation had revealed that Maya herself had been under surveillance for weeks before the confrontation at Executive Tower. The criminals had identified her as a potential threat not because of her forensics training, which they had somehow failed to discover, but because of her pattern of careful observation during business meetings. They'd considered various approaches to neutralize her potential interference, ranging from having her fired to more direct intimidation tactics. The revelation had been chilling. Maya realized she'd been walking unknowingly through a complex chess game where multiple players had been planning moves and counter-moves based on observations she'd never suspected were occurring. Her intervention hadn't just prevented a fraud, it had disrupted a carefully orchestrated operation that had been months in the planning.
But the success had generated new challenges that threatened to overwhelm even Maya's enhanced resources. The publicity surrounding the Cascade Industries case had made her a target for other criminal organizations seeking revenge or attempting to intimidate her into backing down from ongoing investigations. The FBI had assigned protective details during high-profile court appearances, and Maya's daily routine now included security precautions that reminded her constantly of the dangers inherent in her chosen profession. The most difficult aspect was the isolation. Maya had gained professional respect and financial security, but she lost the ability to blend anonymously into crowds and observe human behavior without being observed in return. The invisible waitress who'd seen everything had been replaced by a visible expert whose presence changed the dynamics of every situation she entered. Webb approached her during a break in the task force meeting, his expression thoughtful and slightly concerned. "Maya, I wanted to ask how you're adjusting to all the changes. The transformation has been remarkable, but I know it's been challenging personally." Maya looked out at the Seattle skyline, thinking about the path that had brought her from serving coffee in this very building to leading federal investigations from an office 3 floors above the restaurant where she'd worked for 7 years. "It's been worth it," she said after a moment, "but I sometimes miss being invisible. There was a clarity to observing without being observed that I didn't fully appreciate until it was gone." "Would you go back?" Webb asked quietly. "If you could return to anonymity while keeping the knowledge and skills you've developed?" Maya considered the question seriously. She thought about the thousands of Cascade Industries employees who still had jobs because she'd spoken up. She thought about the other fraud schemes they'd prevented, the criminals they'd helped prosecute, the businesses they'd protected from financial devastation. The work was meaningful in ways that serving coffee had never been, but the personal cost was higher than she'd anticipated. "No," Maya said finally. "I wouldn't go back, but I wouldn't choose this path again either, knowing what I know now about the sacrifices required. The invisible waitress who could see everything was a different person than the visible expert who has to be careful what she observes and how she acts on those observations." Webb nodded thoughtfully. "The board has been discussing ways to support you better. We're considering establishing a foundation focused on financial crime prevention education with you as the executive director. It would give you more autonomy while maintaining your connection to active investigations." The offer was intriguing, an opportunity to shape policy and prevention strategies while stepping back from the front lines of active criminal investigations. Maya realized she was being offered what amounted to a promotion that would provide greater personal security while allowing her to influence how society protected itself from sophisticated financial crimes. But before she could respond, Agent Chen was calling the task force back to session with news that would once again reshape Maya's understanding of the challenges they faced. "We've received intelligence suggesting the Volkov network was just one component of a larger criminal organization. The parent group appears to be planning simultaneous attacks on financial infrastructure across multiple countries, potentially coordinated with state-level actors seeking to destabilize Western economies." Maya felt the familiar chill of recognition. The same instinct that had warned her about the fraudulent documents at Table 12 was now screaming warnings about something much larger and more dangerous than anything they'd previously encountered. She was no longer just preventing corporate fraud. She was defending against what appeared to be economic warfare disguised as criminal enterprise. The invisible waitress who'd saved one company had become a visible defender whose expertise was needed to protect entire economic systems. The transformation was complete, but Maya realized it was also just beginning. 3 years after the confrontation at Executive Tower, Maya Rodriguez stood before a packed auditorium at Georgetown University, delivering the keynote address for the National Conference on Financial Crime Prevention. The audience included FBI directors, international law enforcement officials, corporate executives, and graduate students studying forensic accounting, people who now sought her expertise on preventing the sophisticated fraud schemes that had once nearly destroyed Marcus Webb's company. "The invisible often see most clearly," Maya began, her voice carrying easily across the auditorium. Not because they possess special abilities, but because they aren't expected to act on what they observe. The criminals who targeted Cascade Industries made a fundamental error. They assumed that invisibility meant powerlessness. They were wrong. In the 3 years since that Tuesday morning at Executive Tower, Maya's intervention had cascaded into changes that neither she nor Webb could have anticipated. The Rodriguez Foundation for Financial Crime Prevention had become a leading voice in policy reform, advocating for better integration between federal law enforcement and private sector expertise. The foundation's scholarship program had funded graduate education for dozens of students from working-class backgrounds, creating a new generation of investigators who understood both the technical aspects of financial crime and the human cost of economic predation.
The Volkov network prosecution had resulted in convictions spanning 4 countries, with recovered assets totaling over $2 billion. Maya's testimony had been crucial in linking seemingly unrelated fraud schemes across multiple jurisdictions, demonstrating how sophisticated criminals used legitimate business structures to mask coordinated attacks on economic infrastructure. But the investigation had also revealed that Volkov himself was merely a mid-level operator in an even larger criminal organization that remained largely intact. Agent Chen, now promoted to Deputy Director of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, had maintained her partnership with Maya throughout the evolving investigation. Their collaboration had become a model for public-private cooperation in financial crime prevention, with Maya's foundation providing resources and expertise that complemented federal law enforcement capabilities. "Ms. Rodriguez," a student asked during the question period following her presentation, "how did your experience as a waitress prepare you for your current role in ways that traditional law enforcement training might not have?" Maya smiled at the question, remembering her own graduate school days when she dreamed of federal employment but never imagined the path her career would actually take. "Service industry work teaches you to read people quickly and accurately," she replied. "You learn to identify who's genuinely celebrating success versus who's performing for an audience. You develop an instinct for recognizing when conversations don't match the emotions behind them. And you understand that most people underestimate the intelligence and observational skills of those who serve them." The answer drew appreciative laughter from the audience, but Maya knew it represented a deeper truth about the nature of expertise and recognition in American society. Her 7 years of apparent invisibility had actually been 7 years of advanced training in human behavior analysis, skills that proved invaluable in identifying and countering sophisticated social engineering tactics. Webb, now a close friend as well as professional colleague, had used his experience as a near victim to become a leading advocate for corporate vulnerability assessment.
Cascade Industries had partnered with federal agencies to develop new training programs for executives, teaching business leaders to recognize and resist the psychological manipulation tactics used by sophisticated criminals. The company's stock price had actually increased following the publicity around the prevented fraud, as investors recognized that Webb's close call had motivated him to implement security measures that made Cascade more resilient than its competitors. The personal cost of Maya's transformation remained significant. Her romantic relationships had suffered from the security requirements and time demands of her position. The constant awareness of being observed and potentially targeted had made spontaneous social interactions difficult. She'd gained professional recognition and financial security, but lost much of the anonymity that had allowed her to observe human nature without the complications of being observed in return. Her parents had eventually adjusted to their daughter's transformed circumstances, though Eduardo Rodriguez still sometimes looked confused when he saw Maya on television testifying before congressional committees or speaking at international conferences. The man who'd taught her about the dignity of honest work struggled to understand why his daughter's opinions were suddenly sought by senators and cabinet officials, though he was undeniably proud of her achievements. The Foundation's work had expanded beyond fraud prevention to address broader issues of economic justice and financial literacy. Maya had learned that sophisticated criminals often targeted communities and individuals that lacked access to financial education or legal resources to protect themselves. The Foundation's community outreach programs had become as important as its law enforcement partnerships, addressing the root vulnerabilities that made certain populations attractive targets for financial predators. 5 years later, Maya stood in the same restaurant where her journey had begun, now attending a reception celebrating the completion of a major federal investigation she'd helped coordinate. The Executive Tower restaurant looked identical to how it had appeared that Tuesday morning when she'd first noticed Webb's distress. But Maya's perspective had fundamentally changed. She was no longer invisible, no longer powerless, no longer watching from the sidelines as important decisions were being made by people who barely acknowledged her existence. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd gained visibility not by seeking recognition, but by accepting responsibility at a moment when speaking up was the right thing to do, regardless of personal consequences. The invisible waitress had become a visible leader by focusing not on being seen, but on seeing clearly and acting on what she observed. 10 years after the Cascade Industries intervention, Maya published her memoir, Invisible No More, A Waitress's Journey to Financial Crime Prevention. The book became a bestseller not because of the dramatic elements of corporate espionage and international fraud, but because it resonated with readers who understood the experience of being underestimated, overlooked, and assumed to have nothing valuable to contribute to important conversations. The final chapter described Maya's return to the Executive Tower restaurant on the 10th anniversary of her intervention. She sat at the same table where Webb had nearly signed away his company's future, now discussing Foundation business with Agent Chen over coffee, served by a young woman whose name tag identified her as Sophia.
Maya made a point of learning Sophia's full name, Sofia Gutierrez, recent graduate in cybersecurity, who was working at the restaurant while applying for positions with federal agencies. The conversation that followed led to Sophia becoming the Foundation's first cybersecurity fellow, specializing in preventing the increasingly sophisticated digital fraud schemes that had evolved from the document-based forgeries Maya had originally identified. The pattern was continuing, Maya realized. Another invisible observer with specialized expertise was working in plain sight, watching and learning while waiting for an opportunity to apply her knowledge in service of something larger than personal advancement. The next generation of financial crime prevention specialists wouldn't emerge from traditional law enforcement backgrounds. They would come from service industries,
immigrant communities, and working-class families where intelligence and determination weren't always recognized by traditional institutional gatekeepers. 15 years later, Maya addressed the United Nations General Assembly on the topic of international cooperation in financial crime prevention. The girl who'd grown up moving from farm to farm with her parents was now advising world leaders on protecting global economic systems from sophisticated criminal organizations that operated across borders and jurisdictions. But Maya's most meaningful legacy wasn't her policy influence or her professional achievements. It was the network of investigators, analysts, and prevention specialists who'd been inspired by her example to speak up when they observed wrongdoing, regardless of their official authority or social position. The Sofia Gutierrez Fellows Program had placed over 200 graduates in federal agencies, corporate security positions, and international law enforcement organizations. The program specifically recruited from service industries, immigrant communities, and other populations where valuable expertise often went unrecognized by traditional hiring processes. Maya often told audiences that her greatest accomplishment wasn't preventing the Cascade Industries fraud. It was creating a system that recognized and empowered others who possessed the observational skills and moral courage necessary to protect society from sophisticated threats. 20 years after that Tuesday morning at Executive Tower, Maya retired from active investigation work but continued serving as chair of the Rodriguez Foundation. The foundation had grown into an international organization with offices in 12 countries, working closely with law enforcement agencies, educational institutions, and community organizations to prevent financial crimes and support economic justice initiatives. At her retirement ceremony, attended by FBI directors, international law enforcement officials, and hundreds of foundation fellows, Maya reflected on the path that had brought her from invisible waitress to visible leader. The journey hadn't been what she'd planned, but it had fulfilled her original goal of using her forensic training to protect people from financial predation. The invisible see everything, Maya said in her farewell address. But seeing clearly means nothing without the courage to act on what you observe. Each of you has the power to prevent crimes, protect victims, and hold criminals accountable, not because of your official authority, but because of your willingness to speak truth when silence would be easier. 25 years after the intervention that changed everything, Maya received a phone call that brought her full circle. Sofia Gutierrez, now Director of Global Cybersecurity for the Rodriguez Foundation, was calling from Brussels, where she just prevented a cryptocurrency fraud targeting European pension funds, a scheme that would have stolen over 12 billion euros from retirees across 17 countries. Maya, Sofia said, her voice carrying the same combination of exhaustion and exhilaration that Maya remembered from her own early cases. The pattern recognition protocols you developed in 2027 flagged the initial documentation. The criminals were using a sophisticated variation of the Volkov methodology, but adapted for blockchain transactions. The conversation revealed something troubling. The criminal organization behind this scheme appeared to be the same group that absorbed the remnants of Volkov's network after the prosecutions in the 2020s. They'd evolved far beyond document forgery, now using artificial intelligence to generate fake regulatory approvals, counterfeit blockchain validations, and even synthetic voice recordings of government officials. Maya's return to active investigation work made international headlines. Her team prevented frauds totaling over $50 billion in their first year of operation, working with law enforcement agencies around the world to prosecute criminal organizations that had previously operated with impunity. 35 years after the confrontation at Executive Tower, Maya published her final book, The Evolution of Seeing, From Invisible Service to Global Security. The book traced her journey from waitress to international financial crime prevention expert, emphasizing the importance of trusting human judgment even in an age of artificial intelligence and sophisticated technology. Maya's final active investigation took place 40 years after her intervention at Executive Tower. Working with Sofia Gutierrez, now recognized as one of the world's leading cybersecurity experts, Maya helped prevent a coordinated attack on global banking infrastructure that would have caused economic chaos comparable to the 2008 financial crisis. At the celebration following the successful prevention of what investigators called the crime of the century, Maya reflected on her extraordinary journey. "The invisible see everything," Maya said in her final public address, "but seeing clearly means nothing without the willingness to act on what you observe."
Maya Rodriguez died peacefully at age 78, knowing that her life's work would continue through the thousands of investigators whose careers had been inspired by her example. Her funeral was attended by FBI directors, heads of state, and former waitresses who'd used Maya's scholarship programs to become federal agents and corporate security directors. The most meaningful tribute came from Sofia Gutierrez, who announced the establishment of the Maya Rodriguez Memorial Fellowship Program. Maya taught us that the most important qualification for preventing financial crimes isn't advanced degrees or official authority, Sofia said at the memorial service. It's the combination of careful observation, sound judgment, and moral courage that allows ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things when the moment requires action. In the months following Maya's death, the Rodriguez Foundation established memorial scholarships in 12 countries, each one targeting students from service industries who demonstrated the same observational skills and moral courage that had made Maya exceptional. The first recipients included a hotel housekeeper who'd noticed suspicious financial documents left in guest rooms, a taxi driver who'd recognized patterns in conversations about cryptocurrency schemes, and a grocery store cashier who'd identified fraudulent payment methods targeting elderly customers. Sofia Gutierrez, now leading the foundation Maya had built from nothing, often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a waitress noticing something wrong with a set of documents. The invisible observer who'd intervened to save one company had created a legacy that protected millions of people from financial predators operating around the world. The Maya Rodriguez approach to financial crime prevention had been adopted by law enforcement agencies on every continent. Training programs emphasized the importance of listening to observations from service workers, recognizing that the people society often overlooked possessed invaluable insights into human behavior and document authenticity that formal education couldn't replicate. 5 years after Maya's death, Sofia received a call that would have made her mentor proud. A young restaurant server in Mumbai had noticed irregularities in documents carried by customers who claimed to be conducting legitimate international business transactions. Following the protocols Maya had established decades earlier, the server contacted local authorities who worked with the Rodriguez Foundation to uncover a fraud scheme targeting small businesses across South Asia. The investigation prevented losses of over $8 billion and led to the arrest of criminal organizations in 15 countries. The server, inspired by Maya's story, enrolled in the Foundation's fellowship program and later became Director of Financial Crime Prevention for the Reserve Bank of India. As Sofia hung up the phone after receiving news of the Mumbai investigation's success, she smiled at the realization that Maya's true legacy wasn't the specific crimes she'd prevented or the awards she'd received. It was the demonstration that ordinary people with extraordinary courage could protect their communities from sophisticated threats, and that the most powerful weapon against financial predators was simply paying attention and having the courage to speak up when something felt wrong. The invisible waitress had become immortal through the thousands of other invisible observers who carried forward her example, ensuring that somewhere in the world, someone was always watching, always ready to act when action was needed most.